This is episode 509 of the Orange Pill Investor. Got to sneak in here. 5 minutes to go. I've been saying my plan was to peel off another 100 shares if we go below 250. So let's put that into effect. And I've already got 12 covered calls, but if I dump this and let's do 100 shares, boom, boom. That gives me $24,000 credit. Unfortunately, these 250 calls are no longer in the money. So that's unfortunate. So let's see what the 200 calls look like for December 18th. It's all the way to next year. All right, gonna have to make this quick. December is still a leaps. There we go. 300's got wrecked, 250's got wrecked. So let's give it another shot with the 200s. Delta's 0.75, that's fine. Each one of these is going to cost 10 grand. So I don't have enough to get 3, but 2 for sure. Should I go ahead and sell the, let's see, 200 plus 100 is 300, so I got to sell at least the 300 strikes, 400 days to expiration. Let's just go, yeah, so I got to sell at least the 300. Let's go here. So that actually costs me 9 grand a pop. So if I get 3 of them, that's a little bit more margin use even. And I already have, can I change the number? Anyway. All right, so let's just do 2 of these for now. Wait, but I already have a covered call. So this is going to give me, anyway. A little bit more of a debit. That's actually going to debit me 18 grand. I think I got 24 grand. And so that's actually going to leave me a little bit more short than I should be. These are all covered, but now I have 12 covered calls for 1,100 shares, except that I have, so I need to buy one more long call. So I could get something a little bit cheaper with the remaining 6 grand, potentially. If I go out to May 15th, what's the 200 strike call going to cost me here? It's actually pretty, that's perfect. Wait, did I say 6 grand or 8 grand? This is fine. Alrighty, so these are just ready to roll, but I don't have time to screw around with it. So I'll just fool with the, let's package up this, and this. Oh, I can't do 5 things. That's annoying. I know these match. Wait. No, not those. Yeah, these match up. So I'll call this PMCC2. So that was the bell, which is fine. This was the main thing that I needed to do today. And that doesn't mean that I'm calling the bottom, right? I'm not saying necessarily that 250 is the bottom. It would be nice. It would kind of make sense if we lose 2/3 of the pump we had from November. We were at like 125. We went to 500. That is $375. If we lose 2/3 of that, that's 275 off of 500. I guess 225. That would make 225 the bottom. All right. No, we'd lose 250 off of the pump. Yeah, that would bring us to 250. So 250 kind of makes sense, but there's no reason why, we can't revisit 225 or 200 again. And if Bitcoin keeps dropping, I mean, if 225 doesn't hold, we're definitely going to see 175. That would just be, hell, maybe flash crash to 150, which would suck. That would be like all the gains, wouldn't it? Would that be all the gains gone? Almost. We were at 1,415 before the massive rally. 175 was the tops when we were chopping. Yeah, that wouldn't actually surprise me. Sometimes the previous resistance that you have to break through becomes the new support. So seeing 175 strategy is actually not completely unheard of. If Bitcoin revisits 84K, that's probably where strategy would go. Strategy would probably go straight to 175 if we revisit 80, 85, 90 zone. And I guess I'll package these together. This is a poor man's covered call too, but it's complicated. I'm kind of, what's up, Buffalo? What's up, dude face? Soleil, steadfast wins the race. I hope so. I've been trying to rethink my initial thesis. So if I go back to a year and a half ago, my initial thesis was that I'm going to assume that the 4-year cycle is real. And then the second part of that is that the 4-year cycle will end, in the next couple of months. Maybe, give myself until Q1 2026 for a little bit extra. But I made an assumption that I would be able to capitalize on that at least sometime this year. And that never really happened. There was like this little, July kind of like testing all-time highs, but this wasn't like, these are not the droids you're looking for, right? This is not the all-time highs that we were looking for. Neither was this one. So it's possible that's it. That's all we're going to get. But with the metric ass ton of printing that the government, not just the US government, but the entire world is going to have to do, is going to be insane to hide the deflation that AI is about to bring. Now, I don't know if that's happening fast enough to save my longs, all my long calls, but it just made me think, especially with the U.S. elections, they're going to want to pump the market. And I'm wondering, did the S&P 500 dump today too? Usually I trade before I go to the gym, and today I was like, nah, I'm okay. So SPY's down a little, but not anything major. So I'm wondering a little bit. I've still been sharing stuff, but I haven't been as vocal about the Knott's Core thing lately. But I'm wondering if Bitcoin is a little spooked. I know that some people are just saying, look, there's some systematic selling going on from like really old addresses, OGs, whales or whatever, letting some air out of Bitcoin's tires. And so that's absolutely could be happening. But I wonder if there's a little bit of heartburn here as well. And the network is kind of like waiting to see if this is going to be a self-healing event, right? Do we get the user-activated soft fork, BIP444, in place fast enough to prevent what would be a catastrophic event if something horrible gets on the blockchain? And if you watch Matthew Crowder's video today, apparently somebody made an AI video of the core devs, like a AI porn video of the core devs, which is unfortunate. And you never know if this is like a false flag or somebody trying to prove a point. But it, I guess Mara validated the block, and it wasn't even through Slipstream. It was just peer-to-peer. So they didn't even have to like pay extra to get this included in a block. I think everything will be fine, or worst case scenario, it is a black swan event. Totally cuts this bull market off at the knees, and then we diamond hands through forking it, and either the user activated soft fork causes game theory to kick in and convinces the people who are running V30 to switch over to the shorter chain, which is weird because the longest chain is supposed to win. But at some point, if the longer chain, and Bitcoin Mechanic went over this, so this is not my idea. This is me just repeating what he said, but it does make total sense. Actually, I'm sorry. I might be getting confused. I think that might have been in sorry, that was in Crowder's video. I watched Mechanics today as well, and I can't remember who said what now at this point. So credit goes to either Mechanic or Crowder, depending on who said what. But the point is even though there's only 20% of the network running knots and 80% approximately running core, there becomes this threat that even though the longer chain is the dominant chain, because whoever is running the soft fork and has a more restrictive policy, those transactions on the shorter chain would be valid on the longer chain, the longer dominant chain. But because the forked smaller network has a more restrictive policy, the longer chain's transactions would be invalid on the shorter. So it seems like, okay, 80% of the network dominant, longer chain, done deal, right? Unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on which side you're on, if CSAM were to get on the longer core chain and then large miners were spooked and defected, then if enough power were diverted to the not side, then they would become the longer chain, and then all of the transactions that were validated after a certain block on the longer chain would get bumfuggled. And so that would be kind of one way that Bitcoin would fix the glitch, I suppose, right? You got two chains, one's got frickin' CSAM on it, and it makes sense for dominant players on that network to defect first. If you're the last one to defect, then you end up just kind of like losing the most of your Bitcoin because you're thinking you mined all this Bitcoin, and then your transactions get fucked. Now you could try to sell that Bitcoin before you jump ship, but it's kind of a dangerous game to play. So it's a weird kind of self-healing event possibility that even if the dominant network allows something horrible on the chain, if the smaller network is clean, there's incentive for mining companies that don't need the fucking public relations nightmare or the legal the legal problems and the political problems of all of these powerful people in the government that have been endorsing Bitcoin breathing down your neck and saying, why are my voters complaining that we have a strategic Bitcoin reserve and you motherfuckers let CSAM on it, right? They don't need that headache. So the incentive would be to defect against the dominant network. And as far as I can tell, with what they were saying, that's never happened before. But it would just, the people who like to rail and say, well, if Bitcoin can't handle CSAM, then it's not anti-fragile. Okay. At first I thought, you know what, you guys are talking out of your ass, but maybe those motherfuckers are right, but for the wrong reasons. Like they don't even know why they're right. Maybe, just maybe, that if that types of shit happens, then everybody will just jump ship from the dominant network that let that shit happen, and they'll get wrecked and they can go fuck themselves. That would just be fine with me. So we'll soft fork that shit out. And really, I don't even have a problem with hard forking it. Some people are like, that's like, they'll pearl clutch. It's like, oh, well, they're out here talking about hard forks. And a lot of people that when they get accused of that, they're like, no, nobody's talking about a hard fork. Like I might be an extremist at this point. Like I'm perfectly fine with the hard fork. If some asshole manages to get CSAM off the network, I don't think there's anything that I wouldn't do to make sure that didn't happen or that didn't get cleaned up for me personally. And I think it reminds me of A Time to Kill, that movie. Actually, it was a good book too, but where Matthew McConaughey is, telling the jury, to close their eyes and imagine all that nasty shit that happened to that girl, and of course the whole entire jury is white. And then at the end, he's, after describing the whole thing, he says, "Now imagine she's white." And so, if you want the Bitcoin version of that, it's like, Jameson Lopp gets up there and he was at some debate. I can't remember if that was whatever the hell they were at recently, and he's like, if we want to put spam on the chain, what is anybody going to do to stop us? And it sounded like there was crickets. I need to still find that original source video, but it sounded like there was crickets because nobody wanted to just step up and said, "We'll fork that shit right the fuck off." And so anyway, the analogy that I was running up to with the movie is, it's easy to say, "Oh, if that gets on there, what are you going to do about it? It's immutable." And my point would be, okay, well, now imagine that it was CSAM, not of just some random person. What if it was CSAM of your own child? What would be the lengths that you would go to get that off of a globally distributed, like every single person's computer distributed across the world in a network? What? And the second part of that question is, not only what would you do to fork that off and get that out of existence, but what kind of monster wouldn't help? Like, oh, Bitcoin has to be immutable, so you just have to have CSAM of your child on everyone's hard drives. Fuck that shit. I still haven't finished Soft War, but the whole point is that we need to escalate. We need to escalate warfare or physical violence, settling disputes into a proof of work scenario, right? We just let proof of work settle these disputes for us so that we don't have to go to escalate to nuclear war. But if there's people out there that are going to die on the hill of Bitcoin has to have CSAM on it so that it can stay immutable, then that kind of means that proof of work has failed. And I guess we just have to go back and do it the old-fashioned way, right? If you don't want to settle these types of disputes with digital power, then we'll just go old school, right? And settle it the usual way. That was a really good commercial. I can't remember if it was Pepsi or Doritos, where they were having a disagreement and they said, let's settle it the usual way, something like that. And everybody in the town had these giant right arms because the usual way was arm wrestling. So yeah, we'll call it that. We'll settle these disputes with arm wrestling. But it won't be quite that peaceful. So, yeah, that's probably more than I should have said about that. But I'm a little fired up. So this is complete speculation. I don't know if the Bitcoin's stagnating price is a hangover from this, from basically what the attack on Bitcoin, right? If there was an attack on Bitcoin, what would it look like? It would look like what Core has been doing for the last 5 years. Not fixing the bugs from SegWit and Taproot, right? You sneak that little sneaky fucker shit in there. And then once, you do that all in secret, and then once the secret is out, you just do it blatantly, right? And you start saying things like Lop has been saying, is like, well, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to stop us? When you're doing those things in secret, it's kind of like you're doing something wrong, but they kind of like pinky swear each other to to secrecy because nobody wants to get caught. But then once you've kind of like accomplished your goal, then you just announce to the world, and it's like an everybody against me scenario, right? At that point, the thrill is in the transgression, right? If we ridicule ancient civilizations for human sacrifice, right? Because you're taking and you're destroying the most precious thing that can be, which is a human life. And that's a source of the ultimate joy for some people. And if Bitcoin is hope, right? Bitcoin is the ultimate good that has been invented in the last 5,000 years outside of people's religious beliefs, then attacking it, damaging it is the ultimate transgression. And, I know you're not supposed to attribute to malice what can be attributed to stupidity, and there's plenty of that going around too. You can, who's that dev? Gloria. If you listen to her talk, like, I'm sure she's a skilled dev, but stringing any sensible logic together is definitely not her strong suit. So, yeah, I ran out of time, but that was kind of the main thing that I wanted to do. But I've also, let me go back to my thesis again. I'm kind of wondering if I should have ever had as my premise that the Fourier cycle is real. Now, my justification for it was, and actually before I get into that, I'm going to check the chats because I've been ranting. We'll see if anybody's got something to say about it. Let's see. Dudeface says, I haven't confirmed this. Perhaps you can. Matt Odell said on TFTC that Knots has automatic updates and he finds that troubling. Watch the last rabbit hole recap. He gave a pretty nuanced take. Okay, I will definitely have to check on that. And I thought that was some kind of FUD that someone had argued against. There's a really good series. I don't know, some guy supposedly, I don't know, OG or semi-famous kind of a guy, or had a podcast. He came out of retirement and he's been interviewing the Knots core folks, along with Jimmy Song. I think he had Luke and Mechanic on. He had I can't remember. He's had a bunch of people on, and I think that came up and was not the case. It makes me want to go and check my my version, because whatever I installed, Knots 28 or 29, I have not updated it. I haven't even looked at the damn thing since I installed it. I can hear it purring down there, so I assume it's doing something. So if I've been updated, or I don't know if there's a switch that lets you toggle automatic updates on or off. Yeah, I thought I had heard that. Didn't think it was true. And I don't really know who Matt Odell is, but if he's credible, then maybe it's the case. So Tyler says, sold the baby's bassinet. She was ready for the crib in a month anyway, stacking. I'm glad to hear that you're not Bitcoin poor, brother. Let's see. Hadn't heard his take quite, but mind you, it's just his perspective. His interview with Saylor at last year's Bitcoin Nashville Con was pretty good. Trey says, what's up? Blood in the water. Yeah, blood's in the water. Blood's in the streets. We're attracting sharks. Ooh, the people who said we'd never see below 100 again. They're straight deleting tweets. They're deleting tweets, y'all. I'm not like a chart guy, but I mean, let's just look. Let's just look at the chart. The only thing I can do really is draw support and resistance lines. So let's make this out at least a year worth of data. Okay, there we go. And if you have multiple points of support, that's kind of good. So we got multiple supports for 107, 108, 107. We got to flash down to 102. We've got support at, what is that? 99. So we're testing, baby. We are testing 100. And what happens if we crash materially below 100, right? Like, if we go to 97 or 98, that's not really That's not really breaking through support. That's just kind of like, it kind of held. You know, if we go down to 97 and then we go back up to 105 or 110, it's not really a big deal. But if we crash materially below 100, then we're going to go down to the next most likely support, which would be, 86 is where we rocketed up, right? So we topped out at 109, then we had a correction. We got the lowest low that we were going to get, and then we started getting higher highs and higher lows, right? And, oh, look, 84K gang. So apparently we rocketed up from 84. We didn't get the 444, but we got good stuff, right? So we got up 112. We've been ratcheting up from 84. So if we crack below 100, that seems like the next most likely landing spot. 84K gang again. So maybe the 444 will be correct. It'll just be a year off. we're a little, we time traveled a little too far and we overshot the mark. Not to get back in the DeLorean and see if we can dial it up correctly this time. So anyway, I think I've got off my tangent twice already. I meant to talk about the Fourier cycles and whether I should just abandon that. Trey says, just for the sake of throwing darts at the board, I think we reverse off of 98,333. Is that what we... 98,333. Is there some numerology in there? What's the case for 98,330? Let's see. Dudeface, some support at 95K according to the on-chain analysis. Yeah, that's above my pay grade. I'm not really sure what the on-chain analysis is. That the heat maps and all of that shit too, or what does that even mean? So some support for 95. Yeah, that makes sense because 84 went to 95 and then kind of stayed there. We accumulated. There's this little bit of slightly higher highs and higher lows, but not, we weren't able to go below 90. And then we went up from 94 again. So yeah, you could potentially get stopped here. And that's kind of what I meant by like, if we crashed materially below 100. Because 5% below 100 is, I don't know, it kind of just seems like 100. Like 95 and 100 is not really a big enough gap. Like, I'm not going to be tap dancing because we only went down to 95 instead of only went down to 100. Like, it's not even that big of a deal. But seeing 84K again would be kind of like, fuck me. Which is crazy. So, yesterday's video, I basically said that every dip in strategy is an amplified buy, which I do think is the case. And the bears are absolutely fucking just dunking right now, I'm sure, right? Just absolutely dancing a jig that they exited their position anywhere in here, which, in the short term would be the absolute right thing to do. But from my perspective, the company is positioned better now than they were when I saw QuantRose 1. And when I saw QuantRose 1, I shit myself. And that was when I realized that Strategy was going to be the number 1 or number 2 company in the S&P 500 by whatever, 2030, 2035-ish. One and two, Tesla and Strategy will be 1 and 2 in either order. I really don't. At that point, it really won't fucking matter. Probably both be trillion-dollar companies or whatever. And even if they fall slightly short of that mark, like it just won't matter. And so I think, Strategy has less convertible bond pressure. They've got a more accretive tool with their preferreds. They now have Strive, which is running their own version. So now we've got a second node validating the transaction. And, Metaplanet, I'm sure will be right behind them. I can't imagine that they're not kicking themselves for getting front run as being the next man up. And I think it probably answers a little bit of the question of why did Strive do this acquisition? They basically doubled their Bitcoin. And as far as I can tell from some of the conversations that I've had with those guys, you kind of have to have, like, your stack has to be just big enough. It's almost like a catalyst or an enzyme where you have to have a certain amount of a chemical in order to get a reaction, and then the reaction is self-sustaining after that point, kind of like lighting a fire, right? You got to get to 351. Is it 351 or 4? What's the name of that book? 451 Fahrenheit? Whatever the temperature is. You know what the hell I'm talking about. But, once you get past the minimum requirement, then the reaction just takes care of itself beyond that point. So in order to offer the preferreds, you have to have, there's a minimum stack that you kind of have to have before anybody's going to take you seriously. So that merger's not completed, but over the next several months or whatever, they'll get that done. And so they, that might have been a factor in like, hey, let's do this because we'll be able to, jam a bunch of Bitcoin onto our stack. We'll be taken seriously with these preferreds, and then we can fast track that offering and beat some of the other guys to market. And that's only going to bolster the legitimacy of Strategy's preferreds, because they're just, when you're the only one and you kind of stick out like a sore thumb and everybody thinks you're crazy. So that was what happened with them adopting Bitcoin in the first place. They were the only one. It was like super weird. And now there's hundreds of companies that own Bitcoin, and it's just normal now. Same thing will be with the preferreds, right? People are a little sus about the preferreds because it's like, okay, this has never happened before. But now we've got two companies with preferreds. And it's kind of wild because Apple doesn't retweet Google's new phone, right? But as soon as Strive tweeted they've got a preferred, Michael fucking Saylor retweeted it. Like that shit, it's crazy because you can't retweet another competitor's phone because there's only, if 1 million people are going to buy phones, every single person who doesn't buy your phone hurts your bottom line. But if, 10% of the people that would be buying a preferred don't buy Strategy's preferred and buy Strive's preferred instead, for whatever reasons, they're all still buying Bitcoin with it. And so it's going to pump everyone's stack. So this is just a weird phenomenon right now where the space has, open cooperative competition, which, as I mentioned before, historically has been how innovation is, is the environment that breeds innovation. I still have to dig into the Strive Preferred and figure out if it's just the exact same thing that that strategy offered in a different, with a different ticker, or I did listen to the presentation from Jeff and Ben, and I think they've got they've got more vocabulary coming out now too, because they introduced the concept of, I think, BTC rating. I don't think I had heard before, and then BTC risk. I wonder whose fucking brainchild that was. Maybe the reinsurance guy. I don't know. Just guessing. But there's going to be some winners and losers. I can't imagine that Naka could release a preferred offering right now and anybody take that shit seriously, right? I know some people clown like, oh, there's a race for these companies to hire influencers. Okay. If you're hiring influencers that are just shit posting, that would be a reasonable criticism, right? And I almost said somebody's name, but I don't want to clown on people, right? But yeah, just imagine someone who bull posts all the time, right? That's the extent of their contribution, is just, hey, numbers going up, loading God candles, whatever. If someone's just, it feels good to have a hype man, right? Everybody needs a hype man. But if you're just hiring hype, then that's a valid criticism. But you can't tell me that you've listened to, like Jeff and Ben speak, and Mason, and these guys that have gotten hired by companies, Tim and Adrian on board seats, shit like that. You can't tell me that those are hype men, right? With no substance, with no skills and research and shit, right? So Jeff was like a fucking pig in slop when they turned him loose and was like, yeah, we want you to go and crunch the numbers on the risk for a preferred. He was wearing a huge happy hat, you know what I'm saying, when they told him that. So like that BTC risk thing that they showed on their little slideshow had his fingerprints all over it. But yeah, there's a big difference, man, between the kid analysts and freaking hype. People use it as a pejorative. It's an insult. Oh, you're hiring Bitcoin influencers. Okay, well, what kind? Are you hiring the ones that actually have a freaking resume, or or people that have like a history of shitcoining and other rigmarole? I don't even remember why I got off on that tangent. I think it was, yeah, there's going to be some winners and losers is the point. And yeah, I wouldn't touch a Naka preferred, but I doubt they could even offer it. I'll be real surprised if they've put themselves in a position to be able to even do it. And to a certain extent, Strive, you could argue that they're maybe even positioned a little bit better, because strategy has not, it's no secret that Saylor wants those the convertible bonds to roll off. They want that shit gone. And as far as I know, Strive doesn't have any. So in that one particular metric, strategy is trying to get where Strive is. Now clearly that they're competing in completely different divisions, right? Strategy's got hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin, so they're playing in the big leagues. But the point is, It's almost kind of like where Elon seems like he's not winning the race for autonomous vehicles because Waymo's been doing it for all these years, but Waymo can't fucking scale, right? So Elon is kind of like let them go through all the regulatory hurdles, and now he's just going to swoop in and learn from their, mistakes, or, learn from the way that they did it. And, hopefully that's what Strive is doing, is looking and saying, okay, Strategy's paved the way. They're kind of like the lead, the lead bicycle in a race, or it's kind of like drafting behind a semi or whatever, and letting someone else do a little bit of the heavy lifting for you. So there's a little bit of an advantage there. But it does seem interesting that Strive said that they're not going to do, I think they're not going to do another preferred for 12 months or something. And clearly Strategy's like, we're rolling these things the fuck out, and we're going to upsize every single one that we can. I wouldn't be surprised if they do another one in the U.S. market this year, right? There's only 2 months left. We kind of knew they were going to come out with something, but it did catch me off guard that it was the European market. That was a surprise. My guess was it was going to be something like a variable rate tied to the Fed funds rate. I kind of thought that would, there was a big black space on their yield curve, and I thought it would have fit nicely in there. So there's still kind of a hole on the US yield curve that they need to fill. So I could easily see another US offering, but they might just be rolling these preferreds out to the different overseas markets. I don't know what would be next, but maybe that was the plan, is to see what kind of capital they can raise in other markets. Dude face, exactly. You can see it in the chart just well. On-chain is purchase or UTXO analysis above my pay grade too. You could roll down your long strikes as well. Helped me pull a profit this last move up to 330 on Strategy. Roll my long strikes down. You have to explain that one to me, because usually if the price of a stock goes up, I'll roll my longs up to take, because it would be cheaper and I could take some of that profit off the table. You can get whipsawed doing that, because if the price goes down, you might lose more than the profits that you took. But usually when the price is going against me, I'm not going to roll down. Oh, unless you meant on these ones that I kind of painted myself into a corner. So yeah, the 300s. If this bothered me, then I could absolutely roll my longs down, get a higher delta, and this would make this much easier to trade. If that's what you meant, then yeah, sure, that does make sense. But these really speculative lottery tickets out here, when the price of the stock is going down, I can't imagine a scenario where I'm going to roll down for any reason. Especially if the IV comes out. Let's see, Trace says, I'm responding below with a Goonies clip I remixed today. Would love for you to check it out. All right, we'll take a look at that. Let's see, that way if we have another quick melt up, you can profit. Don't let me dissuade you from the deep out of the monies, though. Just counterpoint. Yeah. And that's kind of going back to me wondering if, based on the what may be incorrect assumption that there's a 4-year cycle and that it will hold, that I should, basically plant a line, a flag in in the dirt or a line in the sand and say, okay, at this point by March 31st, 2026, if we don't get one more rally, then I'm just going to cut bait and move on. Because of all of the money printing and a little bit with, however long it takes for them to develop BIP 444 and get the user activated soft fork ready, like maybe that restores Bitcoin's confidence, and maybe, the Fed pumps the entire market and everything starts to run. But what if it takes until the midterms for that to happen? And a lot of times they need an excuse to really drop the rates. So it wouldn't surprise me if they engineered a market crash just to justify dropping the rates, which would be catastrophic too. So I'm kind of wondering if I should just continue this until it works. Like even if it takes another year. But I really have to be careful about that thinking, because it could just be revenge betting. We have a saying when our covered calls get threatened, we call it roll. Roll till you're right. You just keep trying to roll for a credit, roll for a credit, roll for a credit, or maybe even roll for a debit until the price of the stock hits resistance and comes back down, and then your shares don't get called away. But you could do the same thing with these long calls, right? I could just keep losing money on these things, trying to roll until I'm right. June and July didn't. June and July? Yeah, the June and Julys didn't work. The Septembers did, because we had that pump in July. So my Septembers printed a little bit of money. But to a certain extent, since Bitcoin is going up forever, that leads me to believe that strategy is going up forever. So I could continue to do this until something good finally happens. If it takes, 2.5 years of losses for these to finally print, that would suck. But in the end, it would probably end up working, right? When we finally do see 444, I'll probably forget about all the money I set on fire with these stupid things. But yeah, the market just doesn't owe you what you want to happen. So strategy's in a better place than it's ever been. It's a hell of a lot cheaper than it was this time last year. So yeah, nothing's really changing for me. I'm just as bullish as ever in the long term. But what's support here? Yeah, I mean, we're already testing April's price. So whew, that could be pain in store. Hope not, but hope's not a strategy. Let's see, I was lowering my strikes on longs on my poor man's covered call leaps. This gave me a better position. That's what I referred to. Okay, so yeah, that makes sense then. Yeah, I agree with you. If it lets you execute more effective short trades, then that totally makes sense. Yeah, it is kind of a pain in the ass to trade this, right? 300 strike, it's only worth $60. That means I have to go out here and try to get premium at the 360 strike, which is, $300, and I'm used to collecting that much on my weeklies. So to collect $300 over 45 days is a difficult proposition. So you're absolutely right. It is going to cost you, though, to roll down. So you got to get that money from somewhere. Yeah, I placed this yesterday and got $200 for a partial week, right? So you're absolutely right. When your long call goes out of the money, it just becomes much harder to trade. Alrighty, I snuck that one trade in and then got in a couple of good rants. And I appreciate everybody for tuning in.